The evening sun bled gold and crimson across Willow Creek's quiet main street, its dying light stretching long, claw-like shadows over the pavement. 8-year-old Lily Parker clutched a small paper bag of groceries against her chest, her tiny fingers curled tightly around the paper handles. The rhythmic tap of her sneakers on the sidewalk and the reassuring presence of Max, her towering German shepherd, were the only sounds accompanying her homeward journey. Max walked beside her, his muscular frame moving in effortless sync with her shorter strides, his keen eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Then the peace shattered. A distant rumble, low and guttural, rolled through the quiet neighborhood. At first it was just a murmur, an unplaceable vibration in the air. But within seconds it grew into a thunderous roar. Lily's breath hitched. Max's ears snapped forward, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Before she could react, 5 bikers exploded from around the corner, their engines snarling like caged beasts unleashed onto the world. The leader rode ahead, his bike a gleaming black monstrosity that roared louder than the rest. A jagged scar sliced across his stubbled face, curving from his temple down to his jawline like a permanent sneer. His smirk widened as he spotted her. Well, what do we have here?" His voice was a slow drawl, thick with amusement as he raised a gloved hand, signaling his gang. The other 4 bikers fanned out, encircling the small girl and her dog like wolves closing in on their prey. Their leathers bore the insignia of the Black Reapers, the motorcycle gang that had been terrorizing Willow Creek for months. Store owners paid them protection money. The police, undermanned and overwhelmed, could do little more than watch as the gang spread their influence like a disease. But they had never, until this very moment, gone after a child. Lily's throat tightened. Her feet refused to move, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Her entire world had just shrunk into this moment. The ring of bikers, the predatory gleam in their eyes, the rumble of their engines that drowned out every other sound. One of them, a burly man with a snake tattoo winding up his neck, reached for her. That was his mistake. A low, menacing growl cut through the noise, sending a shiver through the cool evening air. Max stepped forward, his head lowered, ears pinned back, teeth bared in a savage snarl. The sound was unlike anything these men had ever heard from a meerkat. It wasn't the protective bark of a family dog, it was a promise of violence, a warning forged in the crucible of battle. The bikers didn't know it yet, but Max wasn't just any German shepherd. He was a warrior, a veteran of the streets, trained to take down criminals twice his size with deadly precision. The moment his gaze locked onto the outstretched hand, his body moved with muscle memory ingrained through years of training. The air between them crackled with tension. What happened next would change Willow Creek forever. Lily Parker had never been like the other kids in town. Born with mild autism, she saw the world through a lens others couldn't begin to understand. She spoke less, observed more. Sounds, textures, even the subtlest shifts in the air could overwhelm her, but they also made her uniquely attuned to things most people overlooked. Her honey-blonde hair, often tied in uneven braids she insisted on doing herself, framed a delicate face with striking blue eyes that could focus with an intensity that unsettled adults who didn't know her. But despite her struggles with social settings, Lily possessed a rare and deep capacity for connection. Not with large groups of people, but with those she trusted. And no bond was stronger than the one she shared with Max. He wasn't just her pet, he was her shadow, her protector, her closest friend. Max's story had begun far from the Parker household. He had been bred and trained as an elite police canine, his intelligence and discipline setting him apart. With a powerful 85-pound frame, his black antin coat was more than just striking, it was the uniform of a warrior. Paired with Officer Daniel Reeves, he had become a legend within the force, known for his razor-sharp instincts and relentless determination in the field. Together they had taken down drug dealers, tracked missing persons, and apprehended violent criminals. But 3 years ago everything changed. It was supposed to be a routine narcotics bust. A warehouse raid, nothing out of the ordinary. But the moment the officers breached the entrance, gunfire erupted. The ambush was swift and brutal. Reeves, without hesitation, shoved his rookie partner out of the line of fire, taking a bullet to the chest in the process. Max had refused to leave his handler's side, his body shielding the fallen officer even as another shot ripped through his shoulder. He had stood guard over Reeves' lifeless body until backup arrived, his blood pooling onto the cold warehouse floor. The physical wounds healed. The psychological scars did not. Max was never the same after that night. His once flawless obedience became erratic, his behavior unpredictable. Deemed too unstable for continued service, he was slated for euthanasia, a tragic end for a dog who had saved countless lives. But fate had other plans. That salvation came in the form of a quiet, 8-year-old girl who somehow understood his pain better than anyone else ever had. The first time Lily met Max, James Parker, her father and a police officer himself, hadn't intended for them to interact. He had brought Lily along to the K-9 unit only because their babysitter had canceled. While he spoke with the facility staff, she wandered down the row of kennels, stopping in front of Max's enclosure. The dog that had snapped at seasoned handlers and cowered from human touch stepped forward. He sat perfectly still, his deep brown eyes locked onto the small girl who stood fearlessly before him. "He's sad," Lily had murmured, her voice calm. "Because his friend died." The staff had exchanged uneasy glances. No one had told Lily about Officer Reeves. When James asked how she knew, she simply shrugged. "I can see it in his eyes. He thinks it was his fault." From that moment, everything changed. The trainers who had struggled to rehabilitate Max watched in disbelief as he transformed under Lily's quiet presence. The same dog who had been deemed too dangerous to adopt displayed nothing but unwavering gentleness toward the child. 3 months later, after intensive retraining, Max officially retired from police service and became part of the Parker family. James had been convinced. Sarah, his wife, had taken longer. She had feared the unpredictability of a traumatized police K-9 around their special needs daughter. But her skepticism vanished the night of Lily's worst meltdown. Overwhelmed by sensory overload, Lily had barricaded herself in her closet, unreachable. Neither James nor Sarah could get through to her. But Max did. He had simply lain outside the door, silent and patient. Minutes passed. Then an hour. And then, slowly, the door creaked open and Lily emerged, her tiny fingers burying themselves in his thick fur. Her ragged breathing matched the steady rhythm of his own. From that night forward, there was no question Max belonged with them. Now 2 years later, he rarely left her side. He was more than a service dog. He was her guardian, her anchor in a world that often felt too loud, too bright, too unpredictable. That morning, when Sarah realized they had run out of Lily's favorite breakfast, the one food she would eat without distress, a potential crisis loomed. Routine was everything for Lily. A missing breakfast item could mean the difference between a calm day and an emotional storm. But the corner store was only 3 blocks away, nestled in their normally quiet neighborhood. And with Max by her side, James had made a decision. "She needs to build independence," he had told Sarah. Now, as the Black Reaper circled, as Max prepared to strike, James's words echoed in Lily's mind. She wasn't alone. Not with Max. Not now. And the Black Reapers were about to learn exactly what that meant. James exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay rational, but the creeping unease in his chest refused to settle. He had been a cop long enough to know when a gut feeling was more than just paranoia. He glanced at his watch again. Lily should have been home 15 minutes ago. Not an eternity, but long enough for a nagging doubt to take root. He reminded himself of the precautions. The store was practically visible from their front porch. Max was with her every step of the way. He had even given her the safety whistle, a precaution born from a cop's instincts and a father's fear in a town growing darker by the day. But none of that stopped his pulse from hammering when his phone rang. Sarah's name flashed across the screen, and the moment he answered, the barely restrained panic in her voice turned his blood to ice. "James, Lily isn't home yet." Ryan Morris leaned against his custom Harley, the black leather of his jacket creaking as he crossed his arms, surveying his crew in the empty parking lot of an abandoned gas station. His presence was an unspoken command, still watchful, dangerous. The jagged scar slashing from his temple to his jawline was a story in itself, a permanent reminder of the day he'd traded a badge for a life in the shadows. Once he'd been on the right side of the law. Now the law was something he spat on. And no one embodied everything he hated more than James Parker, the man who had once been his partner, the man who had testified against him. He flicked his cigarette onto the cracked pavement, grinding it under his boot. "Shipments coming through tonight. The supplier's jumpy after the bust in Millfield. We need things clean, no hiccups." His gaze locked onto Brian Taylor, the 25-year-old son of Willow Creek's mayor. A rich boy trying to play outlaw, riding a Harley his father had no idea existed. The irony made Ryan smirk. "Your old man still at that fundraiser tonight?" Brian pushed his designer sunglasses up his nose. "Yeah, he's at the country club until at least 10. "Good. That keeps the heat off us." Ryan turned to Michael Reynolds, their newest recruit, a veteran with a past written in scars, both visible and unseen. A man who'd once been a warrior for his country, now just another casualty in a war no one cared about. You're on lookout at the North Bridge. No distractions, no screw-ups. You hear me? Michael nodded, jaw tight. He didn't want to be here. That much was clear. But withdrawal was a brutal master, and right now the Reapers were the only ones keeping him from falling apart completely. Ryan was about to move on when something caught his attention. A small figure across the street walking alone. A girl, with a German shepherd trotting by her side. His eyes narrowed. He knew that dog. Well, well, he murmured. Isn't that Parker's kid? The other men followed his gaze. Lily Parker walked with measured, deliberate steps, her hand gripping a plastic grocery bag. She was focused on something invisible to them, her gaze fixed on the cracks in the sidewalk, carefully avoiding them. But Ryan saw something else. Vulnerability. Looks like she's all alone, Dave muttered, a predatory glint in his eyes. Except for the mutt. Ryan's mind worked fast, already piecing together an opportunity too perfect to ignore. If Parker wanted to keep sticking his nose where it didn't belong, maybe it was time to remind him that even cops had weak spots. He straightened, his voice casual but laced with intent. Gentlemen, I think we just found our insurance policy for tonight. Brian shifted uncomfortably. Kidnapping? Ryan, that's. Nobody's kidnapping anyone. Ryan's voice hardened, though the smirk tugging at his mouth suggested otherwise. We just borrow her for a few hours. Parker gets the message. By morning she's home safe, and he learns to mind his damn business. He turned to Michael. That gonna be a problem, soldier? Michael's stomach churned, but he forced himself to shake his head. No problem. Ryan's smirk widened. Good. We cut her off at the corner. Brian, you swing behind to block her retreat. Dave, if the mutt acts up, handle it. Engines roared to life, drowning out any remaining hesitation. Lily felt the vibration before she heard them. The low rumble of approaching motorcycles sent a wave of discomfort through her. She stopped walking. Her fingers tightened around Max's fur, her mind struggling to process the sudden intrusion of noise, movement, and unpredictability. The balance of her world, so carefully maintained, teetered dangerously. Max stiffened at her side. His ears swiveled forward, body tensing in a way that was different from his usual alertness. This was something else. Something deeper. A readiness he hadn't displayed since the days before he had become Lily's protector. The motorcycles closed in with eerie precision. 2 from the front. 2 from behind. The 5th, larger and more menacing, pulled directly across her path. The sound surrounded her, reverberating in her skull, threatening to send her into sensory shutdown. She clutched her grocery bag to her chest, breathing shallow, her heart hammering. A man swung off his bike in front of her. He had a scar on his face, a sharp smirk twisting his lips. Well, hello there, little Miss Parker. Out shopping all by yourself? That doesn't seem very safe. Max moved instantly, positioning himself between Lily and the man, his body forming a living barrier. A low, rolling growl rumbled in his chest, not the sound of a pet defending its owner, but something ancient and primal, something that spoke of training, discipline, and the capacity for violence. Ryan hesitated. He recognized that stance, that posture. This wasn't just any dog. Call off your mutt, kid, he ordered, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his voice now. We just want to talk. Lily remained frozen, her mind a whirlwind of noise and fear. But through the chaos, something clicked into place. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, lessons drilled into her since she was old enough to understand. If you're ever in danger, don't run. Stand your ground. Use your voice. But Lily didn't need her voice. She had something stronger. She looked down at Max, her fingers gripping his fur. And in a steady whisper, she gave the command she had memorized from her father's training sessions. Max, guard. The reaction was instant. Max's entire body shifted into something lethal. The controlled, deliberate transformation from protector to weapon. His muscles coiled, his stance solidified, and his growl deepened into something that sent a primal warning through the men surrounding them. The Black Reapers had expected a pet, maybe even a well-trained one, but they weren't facing a pet. They were facing a soldier, and they had just made a very dangerous mistake. Max's reputation had been forged in fire. The head trainer had seen thousands of dogs pass through the academy, but none like him. "This one's special," he had said, watching Max execute a series of complex commands with flawless precision, each movement a testament to his discipline and raw intelligence. "Best natural aptitude I've seen in 15 years. The morning sun gleamed off Max's sleek coat as he tore through the training course, undeterred by the deliberately placed distractions. Bright flashing lights, deafening sirens, even simulated gunfire erupting from hidden speakers. Nothing broke his focus. When the explosion of sound cracked through the air, he didn't flinch. Didn't hesitate. He advanced. Muscles coiled, movements controlled, he took down the padded training assistant with a forceful precision that left no room for error. His drive was unparalleled, but what truly set Max apart was his balance. "Most high-drive dogs can't dial it back when needed," the trainer had mused, watching Max intently. "This one can shift from attack mode to gentle as a lamb in a split second." To demonstrate, he gave a single command, and Max immediately released his hold, backing away to sit at attention, eyes locked onto his handler, awaiting further instruction. When a child-sized dummy was introduced into the scenario, the transformation was instantaneous. His once rigid posture softened, his tail wagged ever so slightly, and he positioned himself protectively beside the figure, instinctually recognizing it as something to safeguard, not subdue. That instinct had made him legendary. Officer Reeves and Max were a force of nature in the regional law enforcement community, their names spoken in admiration and awe. In their first year alone, they had 12 successful apprehensions and 15 major drug busts. Max was an asset unlike any other. He could detect narcotics in the most ingeniously hidden compartments, track suspects across impossible terrain, and execute takedowns with surgical precision. It wasn't just skill, it was something deeper. A bond. A connection that allowed them to move as one. "It's like they share a brain," a fellow officer had once remarked, shaken after watching them clear an entire building without exchanging a single verbal command. Then came the raid that changed everything. It was supposed to be routine. Intelligence had suggested a significant fentanyl shipment was being stored in a warehouse, awaiting distribution. What the intelligence had failed to reveal was that the building was guarded by former military contractors, men with combat experience, automatic weapons, and a shoot-first mentality. The moment the tactical team breached the main entrance, they walked into hell. Gunfire erupted. A chaotic, deafening ambush. Officer Chris Jensen, a rookie barely 2 months out of the academy, froze in the fatal funnel of the doorway, bullets ricocheting inches from his head. Without a moment's hesitation, Reeves had shoved him to safety, stepping into the line of fire himself. Max launched into action, targeting the nearest gunman with the precision of a missile. The man barely had time to react before Max's powerful jaws clamped down, bringing him to the ground even as Reeves took a direct hit. The shepherd finished the takedown and turned back, sprinting to Reeves' crumpled form, standing over him snarling, a wall of fur and fury refusing to let anyone near. Bullets tore through the air and Max took a round to the shoulder, but he did not move, did not yield. Not until every threat was neutralized. It had taken the intervention of the K-9 unit commander to finally get Max to stand down. By then it was too late. Reeves was gone. After that, everything changed. The dog that had once executed commands with joyful precision became unpredictable, volatile. During an evaluation, he completed the course perfectly. Then, with no warning, turned on the training assistant when the man made a sudden movement. 3 different handlers attempted to work with him, but Max rejected them all, refusing to bond. The final straw came when he attacked a maintenance worker carrying a tool that vaguely resembled a weapon. No serious injury occurred, but the decision had been made. An unpredictable K-9 was a liability. Max was scheduled for euthanasia. Then James Parker intervened. He had heard about the shepherd's situation from a fellow officer and fought to save him. And now, in this moment, facing down the men surrounding Lily, Max's instincts sharpened to a blade's edge. The men carried themselves with the same tension, the same micro-expressions, that Max had been trained to identify in armed suspects. The jagged scarred man standing in front of Lily shifted his weight, reaching toward his waistband. Max recognized the movement instantly. Danger. "Dave, grab the kid," Ryan ordered, his hand hovering near his own concealed weapon. "The rest of you deal with the dog." The second Dave lunged toward Lily, Max moved. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. He exploded into action with the precision that had made him the most feared K-9 asset in the department. His powerful jaws clamped onto Dave's forearm with calculated pressure. Enough to immobilize, not maim. Dave howled, dropping to his knees as Max held firm, his grip unwavering despite the man's frantic struggles. "Get this thing off me!" Dave screamed, his free hand flailing uselessly against Max's ironclad grip. Brian Taylor, the mayor's son, stood frozen. He had joined the Black Reapers in an act of rebellion, lured by the thrill, the power. But this wasn't what he had signed up for. Watching Max subdue Dave with ruthless efficiency, his stomach twisted. His father's face flickered in his mind. Not the usual stern disappointment, but something worse. The devastation he'd wear when he found out his son had threatened a child. "We're crossing lines here," Brian muttered, stepping back. "This isn't what I signed up for." Ryan's composure was slipping, his careful planning unraveling. He had encountered K-9 units before, but this? Watching Max work, watching the calculated way he assessed threats, reminded him of just how lethal these animals could be. This wasn't some pet acting on instinct. This was a trained officer executing tactics with deadly precision. Michael Reynolds, former Army Ranger, felt something shift deep inside him. He had joined the Black Reapers out of desperation, but there had always been lines he refused to cross. And this, watching grown men threaten a child, this was beyond those lines. Memories of war surfaced, of the children his unit had once protected. His grip tightened. "We need to back off," Michael said, his military bearing snapping back into place. "This is wrong. She's just a kid." Ryan whirled, fury twisting his face. "You going soft on me, soldier?" Michael didn't back down. There's nothing soft about knowing where to draw the line. Then Lily moved. Trembling but remembering her father's instructions, she lifted the emergency whistle around her neck and blew 3 sharp blasts. The sound cut through the air like a gunshot. Dave screamed in pain. Ryan snapped. He drew his pistol, leveling it at Max. "Let him go, or I put a bullet in you." Max didn't move. His training was absolute. Ryan's finger tightened on the trigger. Michael moved first. Dave clutched his arm, his fingers slick with blood as it seeped through his grip. His breath came in ragged gasps, his face ashen from pain and shock. "That thing broke my arm," he howled, staggering backward toward his motorcycle. His voice cracked with desperation. "I need a hospital." Ryan barely spared him a glance, his mind racing. "Nobody's going anywhere until we settle this," he snapped, but the confidence in his voice had fractured. This was supposed to be a simple scare tactic, a message to James Parker, a flex of power. Now it had spiraled into something far more dangerous. If Parker found out he'd targeted Lily, his entire foothold in Willow Creek would crumble. And somewhere deep in the recesses of his mind, a voice, one that sounded suspiciously like his former police training, whispered a reminder of the legal consequences. Threatening a minor wasn't just another line crossed, it was a noose tightening around his neck. Through the chaos, Brian had been inching away. He had never truly belonged in the Black Reapers, and now that the gang's brand of violence had materialized in its rawest form, his privileged instincts overrode his foolish rebellion. His father would never forgive him, but that was nothing compared to the self-loathing twisting in his gut. This wasn't what he had signed up for. "This is over," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper but firm. He swung his leg over his motorcycle, kick-starting it with a growl of the engine. Without waiting for a response, he peeled out, leaving a cloud of dust and the wreckage of his outlaw aspirations behind. Ryan's jaw tightened as he watched Brian flee. "You'll regret that, rich boy," he growled under his breath, the desertion stinging his pride. But he had bigger problems. Dave was down, Brian was gone, and Michael of all people was standing against him. The balance of power had shifted. He had to regain control. Now, the decision crystallized in an instant. His hand shot out, reaching for Lily. If he had leverage, he could turn this back in his favor. But Max moved first. The shepherd exploded into action, launching himself between Ryan and Lily with blistering speed. His powerful jaws snapped shut just inches from Ryan's outstretched hand, forcing him to lurch backward. A flicker of fear flashed across Ryan's face before it contorted into fury. Without thinking, he yanked his gun from his waistband, his pulse hammering with adrenaline. Michael reacted on instinct. Years of military training propelled him forward, tackling Ryan just as the weapon cleared its holster. Both men crashed to the pavement, the gun skidding away across the asphalt. "Run!" Michael roared. "Take your dog and run." But Lily couldn't move. Fear paralyzed her, her sensory system overloaded by the rapid chaos unfolding around her. Max, however, understood. The shepherd circled back, pressing against her leg in the exact manner he'd been trained, to ground her, to bring her back to reality when the world became too much. The pressure worked. Lily's fingers dug into Max's fur, the familiar texture anchoring her. Her breath hitched, then evened. She took one step back. Then another. Max moved with her, his stance unwavering, his golden eyes locked onto the two men grappling on the ground. Ryan was strong, fueled by rage, and he used it. He wrenched free, landing a brutal punch to Michael's face that sent the former soldier's head snapping back against the pavement. "You're dead," Ryan hissed. "You hear me? Dead." Then the siren screamed through the air. Ryan froze, his fist still raised. The distant wail of police cruisers shattered whatever bravado remained in him. His survival instincts, honed from years of skirting the law, overrode his fury. With a final vicious strike to Michael's ribs, he scrambled to his feet. "Dave, we're leaving." Dave, still cradling his injured arm, didn't hesitate. Both men vaulted onto their motorcycles, engines roaring as they prepared to vanish into the night. But before they took off, Ryan turned, his gaze locking onto Lily and Max. His eyes gleamed with something dark, something unfinished. "This isn't over, kid," he snarled. "Tell your daddy Ryan Morris says hello." Then he was gone, his tires kicking up gravel as he disappeared down the road. Michael groaned, rolling onto his side, blood trickling from his split lip. He glanced up at Lily, who was still clutching Max, her small frame trembling but unbroken. He managed a weak, painful smile. "You've got quite a partner there." Lily didn't respond, only pressed her face into Max's fur. Michael exhaled sharply, wincing as he touched his ribs. "Your dad," he murmured. "He talked to me this morning. About getting clean. That was him, wasn't it?" Lily hesitated, then nodded, her grip on Max tightening. Michael spat blood onto the pavement. His voice came rough but certain. "Tell him. I'm ready. I'll take him up on that offer." The sirens grew louder. A police cruiser skidded to a stop, and the driver's side door flew open. Officer James Parker sprinted toward them, his face drawn with terror. "Lily!" he shouted, dropping to his knees before her. His hands trembled as he cupped her face. "Are you hurt? What happened?" Before she could answer, Max barked once. The alert signal, his old training kicking in. The response to a completed apprehension. Despite the chaos, James felt the ghost of a smile tug at his lips. Some instincts never faded. "Dad," Lily whispered, pointing toward Michael. "He helped us. The bad men wanted to take me, but Max stopped them. And this man," she hesitated, trying to get the words out through the tangle of her overwhelmed thoughts, "told me to run. He said he wants to take your offer. Now." James turned, finally seeing Michael properly. And then the pieces fell into place with gut-wrenching clarity. The Black Reapers had targeted his daughter, and the man he had tried to save had saved her instead. "An ambulance is on the way," James said, extending a hand to help Michael up. "I think we have a lot to talk about." At Willow Creek Medical Center, James paced the waiting room, his police radio crackling with updates from the pursuit of Ryan Morris. Across from him, Sarah sat with Lily, her arm wrapped protectively around their daughter. Lily remained still, eerily so, her wide eyes locked onto the emergency department doors. At her feet, Max lay vigilant, his body rigid with the tension of a soldier still on duty. Chief Thomas Green approached, his face grim. "The mayor's asking for updates every 15 minutes, he murmured. His son just turned himself in, walked into the station and confessed to everything. James' grip tightened on the windowsill. Was he involved? According to his statement, he backed out when he realized what Morris was planning. He's giving us everything. Names, locations, operations. Green exhaled heavily. The mayor's beside himself. James forced himself to exhale, releasing the rage threatening to consume him. And Morris. Roadblocks are up, state police are involved. He knows his operation is blown. He's desperate. Green hesitated, then added, James, he's been telling his crew you betrayed him during the corruption case. He's made this personal. The words sent a chill through James' spine. This wasn't random, he realized. He targeted Lily specifically. Because of me. Before Green could reply, the emergency doors swung open. A doctor approached, urgent. Officer Parker? Michael Reynolds is asking for you. He says it's important. James followed, his gut tightening. Whatever Michael had to say, it wasn't over yet. James felt his pulse spike as the weight of Michael's words sank in. When is this happening? He demanded, his voice clipped and urgent. Right at 9, Michael confirmed grimly. Morris is still going through with it. He thinks keeping the department distracted with his fake leads works in his favor. James clenched his fists. Of course, Morris would try to play the chaos to his advantage. The bastard was ruthless. Michael hesitated, then lowered his voice, eyes darting to the door. There's more. Morris said something about taking what Parker loves before he leaves town. I think he meant Lily. The name fell from James' lips like a gunshot. He was already moving, his gut twisting with cold fear. I need to get my family to safety. He barely heard Michael calling after him as he rushed back to the waiting room, his mind a storm of contingency plans. His family was in danger and he was running out of time. Just as he reached Sarah and Lily, the hospital lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then total darkness swallowed the ward. For 3 agonizing seconds, the world stood still. Then the emergency generators kicked in, bathing the hospital in harsh, sterile light. But the damage was already done, something had changed. Max, always attuned to danger, was on his feet instantly, his deep growl cutting through the hushed confusion of patients and staff. Then James saw him. Ryan Morris stood at the emergency entrance, a pistol gripped in one hand and something far more dangerous in the other, a remote detonator. Behind him, Dave and 2 more Reapers blocked the exit, their faces hidden behind dark motorcycle helmets. The scene burned itself into James' mind in an instant. Morris wasn't just here to threaten. He was here to end this. Nobody moves. Morris roared, his voice booming over the startled gasps and panicked murmurs of patients and staff. Parker, I know you're here. Show yourself, or I start putting bullets in random people. James stepped into the open, his service weapon raised. Morris put it down. The building is surrounded. Morris smirked. No, it isn't. Your boys are all out chasing decoys, wasting their time while I get what I came for. He lifted the detonator. This controls charges placed on the gas main outside. One press and this whole place becomes a crater. Everyone in here, your wife, your kid, every doctor and patient, goes up in flames. The terrified patients shrank back, some ducking behind chairs and counters. A few staff members scrambled for their phones, but none dared to move too fast. Sarah pulled Lily close, shielding her with her own body, her eyes locked on James. James measured the distance. Morris stood too far for a clean shot, and with so many civilians nearby, the risk was unacceptable. He kept his voice even. What do you want, Ryan? Morris's scarred face twisted into a mocking smile. Access to the evidence lockup. The diamonds from the Johansson case. They're my retirement plan. You're going to call the station, use your override code to dismiss the officers on duty, then meet me there with the keys and combinations. His grin widened. And if I refuse? James challenged. Morris's gaze drifted to Sarah and Lily. Then I take your family instead. Insurance until I'm safely out of town. James felt white-hot fury coil in his chest, but his expression remained unreadable. You really think you're walking away from this? Morris chuckled. I know I am. Because you're weak, Parker. Always have been. Always putting people before the job. Like right now? You're hesitating. Wondering if you can take me out before I hit this button. But you won't risk it. That hesitation is why I was always the better cop. James didn't take the bait. Instead, he noted something critical. Max had remained frozen beside Lily, his muscles coiled, waiting for a command. His ears twitched forward, locked on Morris, his training razor-sharp. Then Lily, barely a whisper, leaned close to Sarah. The bad man is pretending, she whispered. His button isn't real. Sarah's breath hitched. Her daughter had always been uncannily observant. And now, as Sarah analyzed Morris with fresh eyes, she saw what James hadn't. His pupils were blown wide, his fingers jittery. He was high. Stimulants. Likely meth. His judgment was compromised, making him even more reckless. Sarah steeled herself. James, she called, voice calm despite her racing heart. He's high. Probably meth. Morris's attention snapped to her. Shut up, he snapped. One more word and that second of distraction was all James needed. Max, protect. The German Shepherd launched like a missile, all muscle and precision. Morris barely had time to pivot before Max hit him full force, knocking him back through the emergency doors. The gun and detonator flew from his grip as man and dog crashed onto the pavement outside. Chaos detonated inside the waiting room. The Reapers moved, but James was already on them, tackling Dave before he could draw his weapon. Police! Everyone down, he shouted. Hospital security poured in, guns raised, forcing the remaining Reapers into surrender. Outside, Max had Morris pinned, his powerful jaws locked on the gang leader's forearm, holding him with just enough pressure to prevent movement but not enough to sever arteries. Morris thrashed, landing blows against Max's ribs, but the dog didn't let go. He was trained to endure pain, and his focus was unbreakable. Morris screamed, blood spilling onto the pavement. Get this dog off me. James, handcuffing Dave, glanced at the entrance, his gut tightening. Then he saw it, Morris, using his free hand to reach for something in his boot. A knife. Max, release. James commanded. Max obeyed instantly, leaping back, but not fast enough. The knife slashed across his flank, a deep cut spilling crimson onto the ground. The shepherd staggered, his training the only thing keeping him upright. Morris scrambled up, panting, wild-eyed, knife clenched in his shaking grip. You won't shoot me, Parker, he sneered. You don't have the guts. James leveled his weapon. Try me. His voice was ice cold. You threaten my family. There is nothing I wouldn't do to protect them. For a split second, Morris hesitated. Then his gaze darted to Max, still standing despite the blood soaking his hind leg. That much should have been put down years ago, he snarled and lunged, knife aimed for Max's throat. James fired. Twice. Morris crumpled mid-stride. The knife clattered onto the pavement. Blood pooled beneath him, his body twitching once before going still. James lowered his gun, exhaling sharply. Officer needs assistance. Shots fired. Suspect down. The scream of tires ripped through the night as Chief Green's cruiser skidded into the parking lot, headlights bouncing wildly off the surrounding buildings. The chief barely had time to throw the car into park before he was out, gun drawn, body tense, eyes sweeping the chaos in front of him. It took half a second for him to register that the threat was no longer active. His gaze locked onto James, who was crouched on the pavement, hands slick with blood as he pressed down on Max's wound. The station, James called out, voice hoarse from exertion and panic. Morris was going for the evidence lockup. He's got a man on the inside. Green's jaw clenched, his grip tightening on the radio strapped to his vest. Without missing a beat, he barked orders into it, his voice commanding. Lock down the station. All personnel accounted for. Nobody in or out without clearance. Even as the words left his mouth, more squad cars roared into the lot, red and blue lights painting the night in flashes of urgency. Officers spilled out, weapons raised, ready for a fight that had already been won, at least here. James barely noticed. A small hand touched his shoulder, startling him out of his focus. He turned sharply, only to find Lily standing beside him. Her face was ghostly pale under the flickering emergency lights, her eyes fixed on Max's unmoving form. He's hurt, she said, her voice impossibly small but edged with quiet resolve. James swallowed hard, nodding. Yeah, sweetheart. But Mom says he's going to be okay. We just have to get him to the animal hospital. Right now. Lily didn't hesitate. She knelt beside Max, heedless of the dark blood seeping into her jeans, and placed a trembling hand on his head. You saved us, she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. Now we'll save you. The emergency veterinary clinic on the outskirts of Willow Creek was a stark, clinical building, its plain exterior betraying none of the advanced medical technology housed within. The moment James burst through the sliding glass doors, carrying Max in his arms, the metallic scent of antiseptic mixed with the coppery tang of blood in his nostrils. The German Shepherd's weight pressed heavy against his chest, his blood seeping through the police jacket hastily wrapped around his wound. Sarah was right behind him, her face pinched with worry, one hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder as the little girl kept pace beside them. Lily's face was blank, her mind no doubt filtering and categorizing every sensory detail around her, struggling to cope with the chaos of the moment. A team of veterinary technicians snapped into motion the second they saw them, a gurney appearing as if conjured from thin air. Dr. Emily Wilson, the clinic's lead veterinarian, emerged from an exam room, her sharp eyes assessing the situation even as she approached. "GSW?" she asked briskly, already examining Max as the techs transferred him onto the gurney. "No," Sarah responded, slipping into her medical mode. "Knife wound to the right hindquarter. Approximately 6-inch laceration. Deep tissue involvement, significant blood loss but no arterial spray. He's been conscious and responsive throughout transport." Dr. Wilson nodded, applying a pressure bandage with practiced efficiency. "Prep or 2. Full blood panel for access and have 4 units of canine blood ready." Her eyes flicked up to James. "Officer Parker, I need your signature. We're looking at emergency surgery." James hesitated, his fingers gripping Max's fur even as the shepherd's amber eyes stayed locked onto him. Trust. Despite everything, despite the pain, Max trusted him. "Will he make it?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Wilson's professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second, concern flickering in her eyes. "We'll do everything we can. But I need to get him into surgery now. He's lost too much blood and there could be internal damage we can't see." As they began wheeling Max toward the operating room, Lily suddenly broke away from her mother, rushing forward. "Wait!" The urgency in her voice was enough to make everyone pause. Dr. Wilson gave a small nod, granting her permission. Lily stepped up beside the gurney, leaning close to Max's ear. Her small hand rested gently on his muzzle, her voice fierce despite its softness. "You have to fight," she whispered. "You're the bravest dog in the world and I need you to come back to me." Max, barely conscious, still managed to lift his head just enough to lick Lily's hand before the door swung shut, sealing him away behind the cold, sterile walls of the operating room. The waiting room was silent except for the relentless ticking of the clock. Minutes stretched into hours. The air was thick with unspoken fear. James sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together, his gaze flicking occasionally to Lily. She sat stiffly in her chair, the overwhelming environment pressing in on her. Harsh fluorescent lights, antiseptic smells, the occasional sound of distressed animals, it was sensory overload, but she endured it. For Max, Chief Green arrived with updates. The corruption at the station had unraveled faster than expected. A desk sergeant, Matthews, had confessed to working with Ryan Morris. The remaining Black Reapers had been rounded up. Brian Taylor was cooperating and Michael Reynolds was stabilized, spilling everything he knew. "The mayor's in damage control," Green told James quietly. "His son being involved is a disaster, but he wants to make amends. He's covering all of Max's medical expenses." James barely reacted. His focus was locked on Lily, who hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, except for one moment when she simply said, "I'm staying." For hours later, the doors finally swung open. Dr. Wilson emerged, her scrub-stained crimson, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. James and Sarah stood as one, tension crackling in the air. Lily gripped the edge of her chair but didn't move. Dr. Wilson pulled off her surgical cap, exhaling slowly. The surgery was more complicated than anticipated. James' stomach twisted into a knot. "But he's alive?" "Yes," she confirmed, "but he's critical." She explained in detail the knife had severed muscles, nicked the femoral artery, even caused a hairline fracture. Over 100 internal sutures. For blood transfusions. The next 24 hours were crucial. "Can we see him?" Lily's voice was small but steady. Dr. Wilson hesitated, glancing at Sarah for guidance. "He's heavily sedated. There are a lot of monitors, tubes, it might be upsetting." "Please," Lily interrupted. It was rare for her to assert herself so directly. "He needs to know we're here." Dr. Wilson nodded. "He's in recovery." The recovery ward was dimly lit, hushed except for the rhythmic beeping of machines. Max lay motionless beneath a thick warming blanket, his breathing slow and labored, a breathing tube protruding from his mouth. 4 lines delivered a cocktail of fluids and medications. His leg was swathed in heavy bandages, elevated on a support cushion. Lily moved first. She approached the table, her fingers twitching slightly before she steadied herself. Her small hand reached out, resting gently against Max's head. "I'm here," she whispered. "You did it, Max. You saved me. Now you have to get better." The machines kept beeping. Max didn't stir. Dr. Wilson adjusted in 4 line. "His vitals are stable for now, but the next few hours are critical." James swallowed hard. What are his chances? Dr. Wilson hesitated. If he makes it through the night, his odds improve significantly. But even if he recovers, he may never regain full function in that leg. Lily lifted her head. You mean he might be disabled? Dr. Wilson nodded gently. Yes. Lily processed this, then spoke with quiet finality. That's okay. He doesn't need to chase bad guys anymore. He just needs to be Max. The simplicity of it shattered James. His vision blurred as he looked at his daughter, the child who rarely showed emotion so freely. And then at Max, the dog who had given everything to protect her. Now it was their turn to fight for him. James placed his hand alongside Lily's, fingers threading into Max's blood-matted fur, feeling the shallow rise and fall of the shepherd's fragile breathing. It was a rhythm that had always been steady, strong. Now it was barely there. Dr. Wilson's words hung in the air, heavy with warning. Lily, Sarah said gently, her medical training forcing her to prepare their daughter for what might come next. Even if Max survives this, his recovery will be long and painful. He might not be the same dog you remember. Lily didn't hesitate. She lifted her chin, her voice unwavering. He'll always be Max. Just like I'm always Lily, even on days when my brain works differently. James felt his chest tighten. The absolute certainty in his daughter's voice, the same certainty Max had shown when he'd thrown himself in front of them, unflinching, ready to die protecting his family, was almost too much to bear. As the night deepened, Max's condition worsened. The fever took hold, raging despite the cooling measures. His blood pressure plummeted. The beeping monitors around him became frantic, flashing red warnings that sent a chill down James's spine. Dr. Wilson and her team moved in swiftly, their faces grim. His body is fighting itself, Dr. Wilson murmured as she adjusted in for drip, her voice calm but tight. The extent of the tissue damage has triggered an inflammatory response. His immune system is in overdrive. His body doesn't recognize what to heal and what to destroy. James's heart pounded. What can we do? Dr. Wilson met his gaze. We're doing everything possible. The rest is up to Max. Around 3 a.m., the moment they had been dreading arrived. Max's vitals crashed. His heart rate spiraled into erratic chaos. The beeping turned into an urgent, piercing alarm. His oxygen levels plummeted. Dr. Wilson barked orders as her team sprang into action. Adrenaline, now. Increase oxygen flow. Get me the crash cart, he's coding. A tech fumbled with the oxygen mask as another pressed down on Max's ribcage, performing CPR. James grabbed Sarah's hand, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. Lily woke to the commotion, her eyes snapping open instantly. She didn't cry out, didn't ask questions, she just ran. Before either parent could stop her, she was at the glass partition, her small hands pressing against the cool surface as she stared at the medical team fighting to save Max's life. Don't leave us, she whispered, her voice so small it was almost swallowed by the alarms. Please, Max, don't leave. For 3 excruciating minutes, the world stood still. Dr. Wilson worked furiously, her hands moving with practiced precision. The emergency medications began to take effect, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, the erratic beeping steadied. The monitors shifted back into a normal rhythm. Dr. Wilson finally stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow. He's back, she said, though her voice carried only cautious relief. His vitals are stabilizing. Lily stayed at the glass, barely blinking as though sheer force of will was keeping Max tethered to life. James wrapped an arm around her, his own breath shaky. He couldn't find the words. Is he going to be okay now? Lily asked, her analytical mind seeking hard facts, even as fear trembled beneath her voice. Dr. Wilson exhaled slowly. He fought his way back from the brink. That's a very good sign. His body is showing resilience, which is critical. But he's not out of danger yet. The next few hours will be the real test. As the first light of dawn stretched across the clinic's windows, Chief Green arrived, his face set in a grim mask. He carried a manila folder under his arm, and James knew that whatever was inside would change everything. We need to talk, Green said, leading James to a small consultation room. There's something you need to see. It goes back further than we thought. Exhaustion was a lead weight in James's bones, but he forced himself to focus as Green spread the documents across the table. This is Morris's personnel file. Before he came to Willow Creek, he worked for the County K-9 unit. James frowned, scanning the papers. Then his breath stopped. No, he muttered, reading the same line over and over, disbelief hammering through him. This can't be right. Green's expression darkened. Morris was Officer Reeves' first partner. James's stomach twisted. For 3 years, they were the department's top K-9 team, Green continued. Until Morris was transferred after a misconduct hearing. Reeves testified against him, excessive force. Morris was cleared but reassigned. And then Reeves got Max as his new partner. James closed his eyes, the pieces falling into a terrible, inevitable alignment. So when Morris saw Max with Lily yesterday, James said, his voice raw, he recognized him. Green nodded grimly. The dog that, in his mind, should have been his. This wasn't just about targeting you, James. It was about revenge against Reeves, against Max. Against everything he thought had been stolen from him. James exhaled sharply, his hands clenching into fists. He'd been so focused on Morris's corruption, on the immediate threat, he hadn't seen the years of festering hatred that had led them here. And then Green pulled out another file. There's more, he said. The warehouse raid where Reeves was killed? Morris was the supervising officer. He provided the intelligence. James's blood ran cold. Are you saying he set them up? I'm saying, Green said, his voice heavy with meaning, we're reopening the investigation. Before James could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. A young officer hesitated in the doorway, discomfort clear on his face. Chief, we found something at Morris's residence. You both need to see it. He handed over a leather-bound journal. Morris's personal notebook. Green flipped through it quickly, stopping at a tabbed page. His face darkened as he handed it to James. This entry is from 2 years ago, when Max was scheduled for euthanasia. James read the passage. And with every word, rage built like a storm inside him. Morris had rigged Max's rehabilitation assessments. He had ensured that Max would fail, that no one would want to save him. If Lily hadn't found Max that day, he'd be dead. James's hand tightened around the notebook. This wasn't just about a dirty cop. It was something deeper, something uglier. It was a vendetta. Years in the making. Another knock. This time it was Dr. Wilson. Officer Parker, she said carefully. There's someone here asking to speak with you. He says it's about Max. And it's urgent. James exchanged a glance with Green, then followed Dr. Wilson to the waiting room. A man in his 50s sat there, his head bowed. He looked up as James approached, his face lined with exhaustion and something else, remorse. Officer Parker, the man said, standing. My name is Mark Stevens. I need to tell you something about your dog. James stiffened. How do you know Max? The man exhaled shakily. Because I saved him once. James's pulse thundered in his ears. I was there, Stevens continued. The night Officer Reeves was killed. I saw everything. Morris had been feeding information to the cartel for months, selling out police operations for cash. He had given them everything. Exact raid times, officer numbers, tactical details. It had been a setup from the very beginning. Chief Green's expression darkened, his fingers twitching near his holster. Why now? He demanded, his voice razor-sharp with suspicion. Why come forward after all this time? Stevens exhaled sharply, glancing toward the floor before meeting Green's gaze. Because I saw the news about what happened at the hospital, he said. I've been keeping tabs on Morris ever since I left the DA. When I heard that the same dog was involved. He trailed off, gathering his thoughts, his voice tightening with emotion. I couldn't stay silent anymore. That shepherd saved my life too. James stiffened. Max. Stevens nodded. After he took down one of the cartel gunmen, I was moving in toward Reeves. Another guy had me in his sights, ready to put a bullet in my skull. Max could have attacked me, but he didn't. He looked at me, read me, and somehow he knew. He knew I wasn't a threat. I've never seen anything like it. James felt the air leave his lungs. He had always known Max was special, but this was something beyond training, beyond instinct. It was something deeper, something almost human. Stevens reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, offering it to James. I took this from the warehouse security footage before the backup arrived. I've kept it all these years as a reminder. That courage comes in many forms. James took the photo, his fingers tightening around the edges as he studied the grainy image. There was Max, blood staining his fur, standing over Reeves' lifeless body, his teeth bared at the advancing gunman. And behind a stack of crates, just barely visible, was Stevens, frozen in a terrible moment of decision, torn between preserving his cover and saving 2 lives. Stevens' voice was low but firm. Max didn't fail those rehab tests because of trauma. He failed because he knew something was off. He sensed the deception. The evaluators Morris handpicked weren't just looking for signs of aggression, they were manipulating the results. What looked like unpredictability to them was Max still doing his job. He was protecting against threats no one else could see. As if responding to the truth finally being spoken, Max stirred weakly in the recovery room. His eyes fluttered open, hazy but focused. His breathing, once labored, strengthened just enough for the heart monitor to register a subtle but undeniable improvement. Dr. Wilson leaned in, checking the readings. "His vitals are stabilizing," she murmured, a thread of hope woven through her clinical tone. "He's responding." Sarah called for James, who rushed into the room, Green and Stevens close behind. As they entered, Max's eyes locked onto James, recognition flickering through the exhaustion. And then, weak but deliberate, his tail moved. Just once. Then again. The smallest wag, but a message loud and clear. "He's coming back to us," Lily whispered, her hand resting on Max's head, her belief unshaken. "He knows we need him." 2 weeks after the confrontation with Ryan Morris, Willow Creek was finally beginning to breathe again. The police department, now under intense scrutiny, implemented sweeping reforms under Chief Green's relentless leadership. The Black Reapers had been dismantled, their operations fully exposed thanks to Michael Reynolds' damning testimony and Brian Taylor's reluctant cooperation. The mayor, his reputation tarnished by his son's involvement, funneled his considerable wealth into funding rehabilitation programs for at-risk youth and veterans, an effort to atone for sins both personal and political. At the Parker residence, the living room had been transformed into a makeshift recovery suite. A specialized orthopedic bed, donated by a veterans support group, occupied the center of the room. Positioned near the wide windows, it gave Max a clear view of both the front door and the backyard, a vantage point that made him feel less like a patient and more like the guardian he had always been. A small table nearby held a neatly arranged assortment of medical supplies: antibiotics, pain meds, fresh bandages. Every detail was carefully maintained to aid his healing. James stepped inside after his shift, his badge heavier than it had ever felt before. His name had been cleared. Internal Affairs had uncovered the full extent of Morris' corruption, his betrayal documented, his conspiracy to steal the Johansson diamonds exposed in court records. But justice felt hollow. The cost had been too high. "How's our boy today?" he asked, setting down his keys and kneeling beside Max's bed. The shepherd lifted his head, his ears twitching at the sound of James' voice. Then slowly, his tail thumped against the blanket. A steady rhythm, a heartbeat of its own. Sarah entered from the kitchen, a pitcher of iced tea in hand. He ate all his lunch for the first time, and Dr. Wilson called. "His latest tests look good. The infection's gone. His muscle tissue is finally regenerating." James ran a gentle hand through Max's fur, his throat tightening. "That's my boy. Always the overachiever." Lily sat cross-legged beside Max, working through a set of flashcards, part of her homeschool curriculum. The school had approved a remote learning plan, recognizing that separating her from Max during his recovery would do more harm than good. Their bond had become vital, not just to Lily's healing but to Max's as well. "Dad?" she asked, not looking up from her cards. "Mr. Stevens is coming at 4. He said he's bringing the special harness." James checked his watch. "That's in 20 minutes. I'd better clean up." Mark Stevens had retired from the DA following his testimony, his evidence clearing Officer Reeves' record and solidifying Morris' role in the deadly ambush. Now he dedicated his life to rehabilitating injured service dogs. And Max was his newest, most determined patient. When Stevens arrived, he carried a cutting-edge canine support harness, military grade. This model was developed for combat dogs recovering from serious injuries, he explained, kneeling beside Max. It provides just enough support, while allowing him to rebuild strength naturally. Max remained still as Stevens gently secured the harness, his trust in the man evident. Their sessions had become a ritual, each one bringing Max closer to reclaiming the strength he had once wielded so fearlessly. Stevens met Max's gaze. "You ready, partner?" James supported one side of the harness, Stevens the other. Max shifted forward, his injured leg trembling. Then inch by inch he rose to his feet. He wobbled, his muscles weak from weeks of stillness, But he was standing. Lily's eyes shone. "He's bearing more weight than yesterday," she observed, her sharp mind catching details others would miss. "About 7% more." Stevens smiled. "You've got a good eye, Lily." The doorbell rang. Max stiffened, his protective instincts flaring as he attempted to move toward the sound. James steadied him quickly. "Easy, boy. I've got it." Sarah answered the door. Chief Green and Michael Reynolds stood on the porch. Reynolds looked different. Clean-shaven. Clear-eyed. He stood taller now, despite favoring his left leg. A permanent reminder of old wounds, both physical and unseen. "Sorry to drop in," Green said, stepping inside. "Michael wanted to check on Max before he heads out." James turned to Reynolds. "Heading out?" The former soldier nodded. "The VA approved my transfer to a residential treatment program. I leave tomorrow morning." James smiled. "That's great news. How long's the program?" 6 months. Intensive PTSD treatment, vocational training after. James extended his hand. "You deserve this chance, Michael. Take it." Reynolds shook his hand firmly. "You and Max gave me that chance. I won't waste it." Reynolds hesitated, the weight of his past pressing on him for one last moment before he finally said it. "They accepted my application for the Veteran Service Dog Training Apprenticeship. I'll be learning how to train dogs like Max, to help other vets." His voice carried the cautious hope of a man who had walked through fire, and was still unsure if he had truly reached the other side. At the sound of his name, Max lifted his head, his sharp eyes locking onto Reynolds, studying him with an intelligence that went beyond mere instinct. There was something unspoken in the way the shepherd held his gaze, as if weighing the soul of the man who once stood with those that had nearly destroyed his family. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. Then, as if reaching a verdict, Max let out a slow exhale and relaxed, his posture softening ever so slightly, a gesture of approval. Lily, who had been watching closely, spoke with quiet certainty. "He remembers. You helped us when it mattered most." Reynolds swallowed hard, nodding. "I made a lot of wrong choices, but that was one right one." The evening unfolded in unexpected ways. One by one, visitors arrived, their presence a testament to the impact Max had made. Dr. Wilson checked his wounds, nodding with satisfaction at the steady progress. "He's healing well," she remarked. "Better than I could have hoped." Then came Brian Taylor, hesitant, uncomfortable, standing in the doorway like a man trying to find his place in a world he no longer recognized. In his hands he held a wooden plaque, hand-carved, the grain of the wood still fresh from careful sanding. He cleared his throat. "For Max," he said. "To honor what he did. What he survived." James took it with measured gratitude, offering a curt nod. It was a small step toward redemption, but a step nonetheless. But the most unexpected visitors arrived just as the sky turned a deep shade of violet. The elderly couple stepped inside, their movements slow but deliberate, their expressions heavy with emotion. Daniel Reeves' parents. Mrs. Reeves moved first, kneeling beside Max, tears streaming freely as her frail fingers traced the fur on his head. "We had to come when we heard," she whispered. "To think that after all this time, Danny's partner is still protecting people." Her husband stepped forward, holding something close to his chest. He extended it toward James, a weathered leather collar, aged with time yet well preserved. "This was his," he said softly, "from his first training days with Danny. We'd like him to have it again. A reminder of where he started, and how far he's come." As twilight deepened, the visitors departed one by one, leaving behind a house filled with quiet reflection. Max, exhausted from the day's emotions, lay curled on his bed, his breathing slow and steady. Lily sat beside him, her schoolwork scattered across the floor, her small fingers absently stroking his fur. From the kitchen doorway, James and Sarah watched them, their hearts swelling with an understanding neither needed to voice. "Dr. Wilson thinks he might regain up to 80% function in that leg," Sarah murmured. "With the right therapy." James nodded, but the question still hung heavy between them. "And if he doesn't?" Sarah smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "Then he'll still be exactly what Lily needs. And what we need. A family member." Later that night, long after the house had settled into the hush of sleep, James stirred at the sound of soft movement in the hall. He rose, instinctively alert, and peered into Lily's room. Empty. His breath hitched, but then he saw it. She was curled up on the floor beside Max's bed, wrapped in a cocoon of quiet trust. Max was awake, his gaze meeting James in the dimness, a silent understanding passing between them. Protector to protector. Guardian to guardian. James exhaled, the tension leaving his body. He moved quietly, retrieving a blanket from Lily's room and gently draping it over her small form. Max's tail gave a single slow wag, a silent vow. I will watch over her. Always. As James returned to bed, he couldn't shake the realization that had taken root in his soul. They had taken Max in to save him, but in the end it was Max who had saved them all. A dog the world had written off as damaged and dangerous had become the unshakable foundation of their family. True courage, James realized, doesn't always come in the form of a badge or a uniform. Sometimes it walks on four legs, bears scars of battles both seen and unseen, and loves without condition. And in that quiet, unwavering love, there exists a bond no malice can break and no tragedy can diminish. A testament to trust freely given and fiercely honored. This story of Max and Lily reminds us that heroes don't always come in the expected forms. Some bear medals, some wear scars, and some, like Max, stand between danger and those they love without ever needing a command to do so. Like many of us, he carried wounds from a past he never asked for. Yet he found his purpose not in perfect strength, but in the unwavering commitment to protect what mattered most. So as we reflect on our own journeys, may we all find a measure of Max's loyalty in our relationships, and Lily's pure acceptance in how we see ourselves and others. Because in the end, it's not the absence of scars that defines us, but the love we choose to give despite them. If you found Max and Lily's story as powerful as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, take care and remember, sometimes the bravest souls walk on four legs.